Welcome to today's webinar, Using AWS CloudTrail to Enhance Governance and Compliance of Amazon S3. Our presenter today is Sid Gupta, who is a Senior Product Manager with AWS Management Tools. We also have Bob Odell and Stas Naiman as our webinar moderators who will be engaging with you and answering your questions throughout the presentation. Sid, welcome. The floor is now yours.
Thanks, Ryan. Hello, everyone. My name is Sid Gupta, and I'm a Senior Product Manager at AWS Management Tools. And today I'm going to be talking about using AWS CloudTrail to enhance governance and compliance of Amazon S3. So what can you expect from today's session? I'm going to be providing an overview of governance and compliance, especially with relation to the cloud. I'll talk about some of the management tools such as AWS Config, Config Rules, and CloudTrail. I'll do a deep dive into AWS CloudTrail S3 data events, give you some use cases around that, as well as give you a demo on S3 data events. And lastly, I'll talk about how one of our internal products, Amazon Macie, is using S3 data events to build their product. So let's get started. So what is governance and compliance? Governance, in the broad sense, is an oversight role and the process by which companies can manage and mitigate their business risks. In the case of IT, it puts structure around how organizations align IT strategy with business strategy, thereby ensuring that companies can stay on track to achieve their goals. Compliance, on the other hand, ensures that an organization has the process and the controls in place to meet the requirements set forth by our governance body. Now let me explain how we can use governance and compliance, especially in the context of the cloud. So in order to enforce governance in your environment, you need to define and control what IT is supposed to do. You need to monitor what IT is doing. Essentially, you need to get visibility into your cloud, into your environment. And you need to respond to changes and report those changes to the appropriate folks so that they can take corrective action wherever necessary. So in the webinar, I'm going to be talking about some of the use cases that help enforce your governance and compliance. I'm talking about use cases where we detect changes to your environment and how you can take remediation actions to correct those changes. But before we get into that, let's just briefly talk about our AWS shared responsibility model. AWS has a shared responsibility model with the customer. The AWS manages and controls the components from the host operating system and the virtualization layer down to the physical security of the facilities in which the services operate. Whereas the customers are responsible for building secure applications, securing the guest operating system, the network, the firewall configuration, such as EC2 security groups, and securing their data at rest via various encryption mechanisms. Customers must carefully consider the services they choose because their responsibility varies with the services they choose. So we're talking about how you can use AWS and its services to protect various parts of your environment. And then the critical piece of your environment is the customer data and what tools and mechanisms you can use to control and safeguard your customer data. For all these reasons outlined above, you definitely need a governance strategy in place so that you can use the appropriate tools and ensure that those tools and mechanisms are working as desired. Now let's talk about what types of data customers are storing in their Amazon S3 buckets. Typically, you'll find S3 to host static website content, your source code, SSL certificates, private keys, your iOS and Android apps, their database backups, logs, sensitive data, as well as password files. So as you can see, there is really a wide variety of content that you can store in Amazon S3. So it's really critical to safeguard your buckets and the content within it. S3 provides a number of features to help with the security and compliance best practices. For example, S3 bucket policies provide a very granular level of access control and permissions to your buckets and objects. Versioning protects the accidental overwrites and deletes. Object tags can help grant permissions through policies. And encryption options like SSE and AWS KMS help ensure that your data is encrypted at rest. In addition to the S3 mechanisms mentioned earlier, there are a number of AWS services that can further enhance your efforts. Services like AWS Config, CloudTrail, and Amazon Macie are just some of the examples. I'll talk about some of them in more detail in the coming sections. So AWS Config is a service that the moment you turn it on, it discovers resources in your environment, and then you get an entire inventory of your resources. You can capture the configurations of those resources and track any changes that occur to those resources over time. You can consume all of this information via APIs that are exposed from AWS Config. You can even do a data dump of your configuration into your S3 bucket so that you can programmatically access it using your own tools. In addition, AWS Config streams all these changes through SNS topics so that you can get a continuous stream of changes that occur to your resources. Some of the key benefits of AWS Config include continuous monitoring and continuous assessment. The key word here is continuous, and it's important in the cloud world to have continuous capabilities. The reason is you've got a number of developers today that have access to APIs, and you can basically spin up infrastructure at the click of a button. You've got mechanisms such as auto-scaling, where resources come up and go within a matter of minutes. And so it's important to make sure that whenever they are online, they have the appropriate baseline configuration and security so that they don't become a weak link in the chain and allow an intruder entry into your environment. So for that reason, it's important to have a continuous capability of monitoring and assessment in the cloud. Some of the other use cases are change management and operational troubleshooting. Since AWS Config is continuously tracking changes to your resources, you have a full backlog of all the changes that happened in your environment, which you can then refer offline for troubleshooting purposes. AWS Config has a number of rules out of the box that help you enforce best practices and detect any misconfigurations to your resources. With regards to S3, we offer some of the rules out of the box, for example, to check whether logging is enabled for your S3 buckets, to check whether S3 buckets have policies that require requests to use SSL, and also to check whether versioning is enabled on your S3 buckets. Most recently at the New York Summit, we announced 2 rules related to Amazon S3. These rules essentially identify buckets that have public read permissions as well as public write permissions. So you can turn on this rule, and the moment you turn it on, AWS Config will scan all of your buckets and then identify those buckets that need your attention. You can then quickly use the results that come out of config rules and then take corrective action, such as restricting the access to read or write a bucket. Now let's talk about CloudTrail. The CloudTrail is a service that helps you get the visibility into your user and resource activity. You can discover and troubleshoot security as well as operational issues by getting a comprehensive history of changes that occurred to your account. This information is useful for compliance audits, since CloudTrail is automatically recording and storing the activity logs for your account. Some of the key benefits of CloudTrail include simplified compliance. Basically, it allows you to log and continuously monitor events related to your API calls. So any API event that happens to your account, you have an audit trail of that, and you can use that for troubleshooting purposes, for audit and compliance purposes as well. This information is accessible through the AWS Management Console, through the AWS SDKs, command line tools, as well as other AWS services. Some of the other benefits of CloudTrail include security automation and security analysis and troubleshooting. As I'll go in the demo in the next section, you will see how we use CloudTrail for security automation. Basically, CloudTrail helps detect changes made to your environment, and then you can use other services such as Lambda as well as CloudWatch to automate the process of correcting those changes. So that's where the whole security automation piece comes in. Here are some of the advanced features of CloudTrail. Management event and S3 data event logging. I'll talk about these events a little later, but let's just walk through the other features real quick. Multiple region and multiple trail configuration. You can configure AWS CloudTrail to deliver log files from multiple regions into a single S3 bucket for a single account. A lot of our customers use it that way so that they have a centralized repository of all trails for all their accounts and regions. Now, this configuration applies to all regions, and it ensures that your settings are applied consistently across all regions as well as any newly launched regions. With multiple trains, different stakeholders such as security administrators, software developers, and IT auditors can create and manage their own trails to track API calls as well as related events. Log file integrity validation is another advanced feature that you can use to validate the integrity of CloudTrail log files that are delivered in your Amazon S3 bucket. This feature is useful in detecting whether your log files were unchanged or modified or deleted since CloudTrail delivered them to your bucket. You can use log file integrity validation in your IT security and auditing purposes. Our integration with CloudWatch logs is a very useful feature because it enables you to send management events and data events directly to CloudWatch logs, which you can then use for search, alerting, as well as additional analysis. You can also receive SNS notifications that are triggered by specific API activity captured by CloudTrail. With SNS notifications, you can act immediately when a pattern of interest is detected. With event filters, you can basically control what is the data that you're most interested in. So you can configure that you want to send like write events or read events to, let's say, to Splunk, so that helps in reducing clutter as well as your costs. So this filter capability is a very useful feature in case of segregating your content. Now let's talk about AWS CloudTrail S3 data events. Data events are object-level API operations that access S3 objects, such as get object, delete object, and put object. Basically, you can start tracking any changes, any CRUD operations to your objects within a bucket, and then you can then analyze that information for troubleshooting purpose as well as for governance use cases. These events are different from management events, which are captured by default as part of your management events. So, for example, S3 bucket level operations are still available in your CloudTrail management events, whereas your object level operations can be captured through data events. It's very simple to turn on S3 data events. You can enable it at the bucket or the bucket prefix level. It will then start capturing your S3 object level API activities. The log files get delivered to your S3 buckets that you designate in your trail. And the cost for those S3 data events is 10 cents for 100,000 data events. Now I want to bring up some topics which are different from S3 access logs. So how do S3 data events differ from S3 access logs? Now, S3 access logs, typically we've seen that it takes between 30 to 60 minutes to deliver S3 access logs to your folder. Whereas with S3 data events, these events get delivered within a matter of minutes. So for use cases that require immediate action, immediate remediation capability, you can use CloudTrail S3 data events for that purpose. In addition, with CloudTrail S3 data events, you can capture additional user identity details, error messages, request parameters, as well as regional information. Also, the information is in JSON format, which is consistent with the other CloudTrail event logs. And you also get the benefit of inheriting other CloudTrail features, such as log file integrity validation. So these are some of the features that help differentiate the CloudTrail S3 data events versus the S3 access logs. Now let's talk about how you can use S3 data events in terms of a use case. So the use case that I'm talking about here is detecting data exfiltration. You can basically detect data exfiltration by collecting activity on your S3 objects using your CloudTrail data events. After the data is collected, you can then use other AWS services such as CloudWatch events, Lambda, as well as Macie to trigger appropriate response procedures. For example, you can detect access to sensitive data from unauthorized networks or IP addresses using the CloudTrail S3 data events, and then take corrective action to block those IP addresses access to your S3 buckets. Another use case is to perform security analysis. You can quickly detect misconfigurations and perform security analysis by ingesting the CloudTrail data events into your log management and analytics solutions, such as Macie or CloudWatch logs, Athena, Elasticsearch, or even a third-party solution. This information is useful for identifying, for example, who changed the permissions on a confidential financial file to the public. Now let's go through a demo scenario. So in this case, I'm going to detect if an S3 object becomes public, and then I'll auto-remediate that issue by removing the public read-write permissions and then notify the security team with full details of the event. So the step one in this procedure is I need to create a CloudTrail S3 data event. So let's quickly go through the demo. So let me go to the CloudTrail console. I'll now go ahead and create a trail. Let me name it S3 ACL check. I want to make sure that this is purely a data event. So I don't want to capture management events in this example because I'm capturing that elsewhere. So this, for the sake of this demo, this is purely a data event capture. So I'm going to configure here the bucket in which I'll be checking all the objects. And I want to check both read and write activities to the objects in that bucket. I will deliver the trails to one of my existing buckets. So let me choose one here and create the trail. Okay, the trail got created. Let's go back to the deck. Now that we've created a trail, let's go ahead and create a Lambda function. So basically, the Lambda function here is going to look at my data event that is captured through CloudTrail, and it's going to look for actions on the object, such as creating and like put object, or maybe it'll check the ACLs tied with the object, and then if it detects that it is public, it will then take appropriate action to make it private and then send appropriate notifications to the concerned team. It will also log all of those actions as part of CloudWatch logs for audit and tracking purposes. All right, so now I'm going to go to the CloudWatch console. And I'm going to create a CloudWatch event rule. I'll select S3 as the service, and I'll look for object level operations. Now this would tell me that in order to detect object level operations, I need to turn on CloudTrail S3 data events, which we've already turned on in the previous section. Let's go ahead and create this rule. I need to look for specific operations related to my objects. So in this case, I'll look for put objects as well as put object ACLs. And I'll also go ahead and add a target for this event rule. So my target in this case is the Lambda function that I created earlier. So basically what I'm doing here is CloudTrail will capture all the S3 data events and send it to CloudWatch events. CloudWatch events has this rule that I just created, which will look at the data event. It will look for the put object and the put object ACL operations. And then once it detects that, it will then fire off and like the Lambda function that I created earlier in order to take the corrective action. So let me just name the rule just for complete this part. Created the rule. Okay, let's go back to the slide deck. So I just created a CloudWatch event rule. Now the next part is let me make some changes to a file or an object that is stored within that S3 bucket. So in this case, I'm going to use a file that's already private, and I'm going to change it to publicly accessible. And the moment I do that, it will trigger the Lambda function that I created earlier, which will then log all the activity to CloudWatch logs and revert that file ACL back to private. It will also fire off an SNS notification to the appropriate team with all the details regarding the change. So let's go to the demo, this one. Okay, so I'll just check the CloudWatch logs here just real quick before I make changes to my file. So you can see that the log is empty right now. There's nothing. Now let me go ahead and pull up the CLI. Okay. So let me check the ACL for my file, which is stored in the bucket called Finance Docs 2017. So as you can see, currently the file is private. It is owned by Bob Odell, and he has full control on it. So basically it's private, it's not public yet. Now let me go ahead and make changes to the ACL and make it public read. Okay, so I just changed the ACL on the file. Now let me go back and check the ACL on the file. Okay, so as you can see, it is still showing as private, which means the change was so quick. The moment I turned it to public, CloudTrail detected that and fired off the event to CloudWatch events, which in turn triggered the Lambda function to take corrective action, and that action has already taken place and it's back in the private mode. So all of these changes were all automated, and they happened so quickly that you can hardly see that the ACL changed at all. But in order to confirm that this is what actually happened, let's go and take a look at the logs. So I'm in the CloudWatch logs console. I see a log file here. Okay. So I can see a log that says, the moment I changed the ACL and made it public, I get a log message here saying that it is not private. And then in the next log, you see that my Lambda function kicked in, and then it was changed back to the private setting. Then I also verified as part of the Lambda function that the ACL is indeed private, and then I logged that message. And then essentially at the end of that, we send the SNS notification to the appropriate folks that a file the ACL had been modified, and this is the corrective action that we took. And so let me show you what the SNS notification looks like. Here it is. So this tells you essentially that the user Bob Odell made a change to the file which resides in this bucket finance docs 2017, and it modified the ACL to public read. So you can now use this information to talk to Bob and make sure that this does not happen again. All right. Let's see the next one. So what we just saw was an automated action where we used CloudTrail data events to detect changes to your S3 objects. And with our integration with CloudWatch events, we fired off a Lambda function that took the corrective action to restrict the ACLs back to the private mode and send SNS notification to your security team. So all of this was automated. There was no manual intervention necessary. And that's the power of using the combination of AWS services for cloud governance. So CloudTrail data events are currently available in all commercial regions. These can be easily enabled via CloudTrail, the console, or via the CLI. And you get the full ability to log the read, write, or S3 object level events, and you can use that information to track your confidential information that you are storing in your S3 buckets. Here's an example of another product, Amazon Macie, that uses CloudTrail data events for its own purpose. So Amazon Macie is a service that was recently launched in the New York Summit, and it essentially uses machine learning to discover, classify, and protect sensitive data in AWS. So this service looks at your S3 objects and classifies that according to various algorithms, machine learning algorithms, and classifies that in a manner that gives you full visibility into the type of data that is stored inside your S3 buckets. And they do all of that by essentially getting a trigger from CloudTrail data events the moment an object gets added to a bucket. So that's just one example of how you can use CloudTrail S3 data events. I'm sure you can build a number of applications that can feed on top of this CloudTrail data and build innovative applications in this space. To summarize, we've got various AWS management services, management tool services such as Config, CloudTrail, and Macie that provide deep visibility into your S3 buckets as well as objects. You can use Config to detect changes to your S3 buckets. If your bucket itself has public read access or public write access, you can use config rules. Whereas if you want to see object level information or changes to your ACLs, then you can use CloudTrail S3 data events. These services help in governance and compliance as a code, and they ensure that you have standardization, and you can use self-service as well as automation capabilities that these services offer to fully automate, the governance that you have in your organization, and make sure that your data is secure and your customers are safe and secure as well. For more information, you can use one of the links out there, and feel free to use S3 data events in CloudTrail and give it a shot. We'd love to hear your feedback.